He scaled buildings with missing fingers hidden by a glove. Another's flawless beauty was scarred and disguised with shadows. These are 12 hidden truths the studios never wanted you to see. And it all begins with actor who risked everything while hiding the truth in plain sight. Harold Lloyd wasn't just a silent film comedian, he was Hollywood's daredevil. Audiences gasped as he dangled from clock towers, leapt across rooftops, and clung to ledges 10 stories high. To them, he looked invincible. What they didn't know was that he was doing it all with only one fully functioning hand. In 1919, a supposed prop bomb exploded during a publicity shoot, tearing off Lloyd's thumb and index finger. The blast nearly blinded him, and doctors quietly warned his career was over. But instead of fading, he crafted an illusion. A flesh-colored prosthetic glove concealed the damage, allowing him to keep working while hiding his injury from the world. The glove came at a cost. It was rigid, sweaty, and often infected his skin. Every stunt became a gamble. One slip could have ended his life. Yet Lloyd refused to slow down. Studios begged him to move into directing. He doubled down instead, creating even riskier stunts to prove he was still bankable. Behind the laughter was a man climbing not just buildings, but the expectations of an industry that saw weakness as career-ending. His fans saw a hero. In reality, he was clinging for survival. But Lloyd wasn't the only star who lived behind an illusion. Some, like Judy Garland, carried pain from the very first step they took on stage. To the world, Judy Garland was pure magic, the girl who skipped down the yellow brick road and sang her way into history. But behind the sequins and the studio lights, she was carrying pain that started long before she became a household name. Garland was born with a physical imbalance. One of her legs was slightly shorter than the other. It made every step uneven and caused chronic hip and back pain. MGM couldn't let the public see that their young star had anything less than perfection, so they ordered custom shoes with hidden lifts, even inside her iconic ruby slippers, to disguise the difference. Every graceful dance routine was performed through a quiet ache. But her legs weren't the only part of her life the studio controlled. She was constantly monitored, weighed, and injected with so-called vitamins that were really chemical stimulants. At just 16, she was pushed through rehearsals while exhausted, her body aching, and her emotions fraying. The imbalance in her legs turned into years of spinal strain, but resting wasn't an option. Audiences saw sparkle. What they didn't see was a teenager forced to carry a pain that grew with her fame. And while Judy Garland's pain was hidden beneath sequins and song, another star's torment was masked behind a chilling stare that would change horror forever. When Bela Lugosi stepped onto the screen as Dracula in 1931, audiences were hypnotized by his piercing stare and stiff, deliberate movements. They thought it was performance. In truth, it was survival. Lugosi had endured brutal injuries during World War I. Shrapnel left him with permanent damage to his lower back and legs. By the time Hollywood discovered him, pain was his constant shadow. Walking naturally was nearly impossible. He moved stiffly, almost gliding, because bending his spine sent shocks of agony through his body. The very posture that made Dracula unforgettable was born from suffering he couldn't escape. There was another hidden curse. Lugosi was severely nearsighted. Without his thick glasses, which he couldn't wear on camera, he could barely see more than a few feet ahead. That famous, otherworldly gaze. It was actually a man straining to focus on shapes he couldn't fully make out. Off-screen, his injuries left him collapsing into chairs between takes, gripping furniture for balance. While rumors whispered he was eccentric or unstable, studios leaned into the myth, letting the pain become part of the role while ignoring the man behind it. And while Lugosi's suffering became a legend on screen, Barbara Payton's tragedy played out in the shadows, where one devastating fall changed everything. In the early 1950s, Barbara Payton seemed unstoppable. With platinum curls, sharp wit, and a fiery presence, she was earning a fortune and gracing the arms of Hollywood's leading men. But behind the glamour was a body and spirit already beginning to break. Payton's personal life spiraled with public scandals, turbulent relationships, and a growing dependence on alcohol. The tabloids painted her as reckless, but what they didn't show was the silent agony she carried after a devastating fall. She reportedly tumbled down a flight of stairs in a shabby Los Angeles apartment building, fracturing her back. Some accounts suggest the injury was even more severe, crushing vertebrae and damaging nerves. The result was chronic pain that followed her for the rest of her life. Studios, already wary of her reputation, quickly turned their backs. Her limp grew worse, her posture collapsed, and her career vanished almost overnight. By the 1960s, the once rising star was living in flophouses, selling herself just to survive. Barbara Payton died at only 39, nearly unrecognizable, her name forgotten by the same system that once celebrated her beauty. Barbara's story was one of decline after a single fall, but James Stewart faced the opposite challenge, returning from war as a hero, only to have Hollywood try to erase the scars he brought home. James Stewart was the definition of America's leading man, charming, boyish, and effortlessly genuine. But when he returned from World War II in 1945, he carried something the studios didn't want audiences to see. Stewart had flown over 20 combat missions in Europe, narrowly surviving skies filled with flak and fire. The war changed him. He came home thinner, quieter, and walking with a subtle limp caused by nerve damage to his right leg. It wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. For a studio system obsessed with flawless idols, even the smallest imperfection was considered unacceptable. Executives panicked. Directors were ordered to shoot Stewart from the waist up, keep him seated, or stage scenes in shadows to disguise the limp. Off-camera, he was pushed through painful therapy regimens designed not to heal him, but to retrain his stride into something the public could accept. To admit the truth would have been to admit their golden boy was damaged goods. But the limp never fully disappeared. Audiences who thought they were watching pure performance in It's a Wonderful Life were also seeing a man carrying the exhaustion of war in every step. Hollywood could hide Stewart's limp with clever camera work, but Merle Oberon's secret was harder to disguise. A face scarred by tragedy and a heritage she was forced to deny. Merle Oberon was the picture of elegance on screen. With her haunting performance in Wuthering Heights, she became a symbol of fragile beauty and Hollywood mystique. But behind the soft lighting and flawless close-ups was a woman terrified of being seen too clearly. In 1937, Oberon survived a near-fatal car crash that shattered the left side of her face. The damage left her cheekbone crushed and facial nerves severed, causing partial paralysis. For most actors, this would have ended their careers, but her husband at the time, cinematographer Lucien Ballard, invented a special light that blurred scars and softened the paralysis. It became known as the Obi light, and with it, Oberon's career was saved, at least on screen. Off-camera, she was constantly monitored, with makeup artists carefully dabbing away drool she couldn't feel on the damaged side of her face. But Oberon was hiding more than scars. She was born in Bombay to a mother of mixed Anglo-Indian descent. In 1930s Hollywood, being part Indian meant career suicide. Studios rewrote her biography, claiming she was from Tasmania, and she lived the rest of her life pretending her own relatives were strangers. If this shocked you, wait until you hear what's coming next. Tap subscribe so you don't miss it. If Oberon survived by concealing her face and her past, Lionel Barrymore endured by staying in plain sight, confined to a wheelchair the studios tried desperately to hide. Lionel Barrymore came from one of Hollywood's great dynasties, a commanding presence on stage and screen. But by the early 1930s, audiences began noticing something strange. He almost never stood. Directors placed him behind desks, at pianos, or in high-backed chairs. What the public didn't realize was that Barrymore was slowly being crushed by arthritis and a poorly treated hip fracture that left him unable to walk unaided. At first, MGM tried to disguise the problem. They strapped his legs into metal braces hidden beneath his wardrobe, forcing him to stand through painful hours of filming. By the end of each day, his skin was raw and bleeding where the braces cut into him. Still, he refused to complain. In those days, weakness meant replacement. Eventually, the pain became unbearable, and Barrymore transitioned permanently to a wheelchair. Studios agreed to keep him on, but only if the chair could be written into every role. From then on, he played judges, bankers, and villains who never moved from their seats. His most famous role, Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, was born from necessity, not choice. While Barrymore's disability was eventually too visible to deny, Frances Farmer's struggles were buried behind locked doors and whispered rumors that still haunt her legacy today. Frances Farmer was bold, beautiful, and unafraid to challenge the system. In 1930s Hollywood, that made her dangerous. She questioned studio contracts, refused to play along with publicity stunts, and spoke openly when she didn't agree. Instead of admiring her independence, executives branded her difficult and began slowly shutting her out. When her behavior grew erratic, whispers spread. She was rumored to be unstable, battling mood swings and depression. Instead of offering help, studios cut her contracts and quietly distanced themselves. Soon after, Farmer was committed to a series of mental institutions. What happened inside those walls remains a mystery, but former staff and patients later described over-medication, forced confinement, and brutal treatment. The most haunting rumor was that she endured a lobotomy, a procedure that, if true, would have dulled the very mind that once made her so electrifying. While hard evidence was never found, the fact that so many believed it speaks to how thoroughly Hollywood dismantled her image. When Farmer was finally released, she tried to return, but the spark was dimmed. She often spoke in fragments, once saying, "I have been miscast, not in movies but in life." Farmer's downfall came from defiance and silence, but Clark Gable's secret was hidden behind a smile that wasn't truly his. Clark Gable was Hollywood royalty, the rugged leading man whose smile could light up a screen, but that smile wasn't real. By his early 30s, Gable had lost every one of his natural teeth to gum disease and years of neglect. Studios rushed him into full dental extractions and fitted him with dentures. To the public, nothing seemed amiss. Behind the scenes, it was a daily battle. The dentures never fit properly. They caused painful ulcers, infections, and even fevers. Co-stars noticed. Vivien Leigh compared kissing him to pressing against a stovetop, while Joan Crawford reportedly masked the smell of infection with peppermint oil before scenes. Technicians had to rework dialogue because his dentures whistled during close-ups. The impact on Gable himself was worse. He became self-conscious, often covering his mouth when he laughed and refusing to eat in public. At night, Hollywood's king would quietly drop his teeth into a glass on the counter, terrified that someone might see. The studios guarded the secret fiercely, knowing that his image of masculine perfection couldn't survive the truth. Gable hid his pain with porcelain, but Susan Peters faced a tragedy that couldn't be disguised. A single accident that left her life and career changed forever. Susan Peters was one of MGM's brightest rising stars in the early 1940s. With an Oscar nomination for Random Harvest, she seemed destined for decades of leading roles. But in 1945, a single accident shattered that future forever. During a hunting trip with her husband, a rifle accidentally discharged. The bullet struck Peters in the spine, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. She was only 23. Hollywood, an industry built on illusions of glamour and perfection, didn't know what to do with a leading lady in a wheelchair. Studios quietly pulled away, afraid audiences wouldn't accept her new reality. But Peters refused to disappear. In 1948, she starred in The Sign of the Ram, playing a character who, like her, was confined to a wheelchair. It was groundbreaking at the time, a disabled actress refusing to hide her condition. Critics praised her bravery, but roles dried up. Hollywood wasn't ready to embrace her. Offers vanished, her marriage crumbled, and behind the public resilience was a woman exhausted by rejection. Peters passed away at just 31, her career stolen not by talent, but by an industry too narrow to see her worth. While Peters was sidelined by a cruel accident, Peter Lorre's struggles were written into every role he played, typecasting born from the body he could never escape. Peter Lorre's haunting eyes and nervous energy made him unforgettable in films like M and The Maltese Falcon. But the traits that turned him into Hollywood's favorite villain weren't entirely acting. They were born from pain. Lorre was born with severely misshapen feet, which gave him a distinctive limp and awkward gait. In an industry obsessed with symmetry and perfection, that difference became a sentence. Instead of helping him, studios leaned into it, casting him again and again as creeps, criminals, or cowards. He was never allowed to be the hero, always the shadow lurking in the background. Costumers built special shoes to disguise his deformity, but the limp never disappeared. Behind the camera, executives didn't trust him with bigger roles, underpaid him despite box office success, and sabotaged his attempts to break free as a writer or director. The typecasting wore him down. By the 1950s, friends said he looked decades older than his age, weighed down by exhaustion, resentment, and the feeling of being trapped in a body and an image he couldn't change. Lorre's body kept him in the shadows, but Gene Tierney's hidden struggles were even crueler. Her beauty stayed flawless while her mind slowly slipped away. Gene Tierney was often described as too beautiful to be real. Her porcelain features and mesmerizing performances in films like Leave Her to Heaven made her a Hollywood goddess. But beneath the elegance, she was hiding two struggles the studios never wanted revealed. The first was colorblindness. Tierney couldn't distinguish reds from greens, an invisible condition that became a quiet humiliation during costume fittings. Designers would gush over emerald gowns or crimson lipstick, and she'd nod politely, having no idea what they were talking about. To cope, she memorized outfits by fabric texture and hanger placement. The second battle was far more devastating. Under the crushing demands of the studio system and personal tragedies, Tierney developed severe mental health struggles, later tied to bipolar disorder. She was institutionalized and subjected to repeated electroshock therapy. The treatments left her with permanent memory loss. When she returned to work, cue cards replaced memorization, and the once effortless actress now struggled to remember lines. Her beauty remained intact, but behind the flawless face was a woman fading, trapped between an industry that only valued her appearance and an illness that stole the rest. Hollywood built its golden age on illusion, flawless faces, fearless heroes, and stars who seemed larger than life. But behind the cameras, the truth was far messier. Harold Lloyd risked his life with missing fingers. Judy Garland sang through pain. She never had a chance to escape. Bela Lugosi turned his injuries into mystique. Barbara Payton, James Stewart, Merle Oberon, and so many others carried scars, illnesses, and secrets that would have ended their careers if the public had known. What made them extraordinary wasn't perfection, it was endurance. They kept smiling, acting, and performing while carrying burdens that would have broken most people. Some transformed their struggles into art, others were crushed by them. All of them remind us that the stars we idolize are not untouchable, they are human, fragile, and flawed. Maybe the real story of old Hollywood isn't about the glamour at all, it's about resilience, sacrifice, and the hidden cost of chasing immortality on screen. If these hidden truths opened your eyes, don't let them fade again. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me which story shocked you most. And if you want more untold Hollywood secrets, make sure to subscribe, because the stories that were buried are the ones worth remembering.